Hey guys, this is the Youngster number 9 back for another chess video. It's been about 2 months since my last video, but I've got some time now, so I might as well put out another educational chess video. And in this video, we're going to be in these 2 videos. It's going to be a series of 2 videos. We're going to be looking at a popular gambit continuation by White, the Smith-Mora Gambit, and this gambit is often used in a lower amateur level chess because it can lead to quick wins, and there's also a lot of traps that black can fall into. So I got the idea of doing this video after seeing another video on another website, ICC Chess FM, and International Master Alex Lenderman does a really good series of videos on those. So I just thought I would try to explain it to the YouTube community. And okay, the Smith-Mora Gambit, I'm sure you all know what the move order is to get into it. It's just after e4, c5, the Sicilian, White plays d4 and offers up a pawn sacrifice. C takes d4 and c3. Now this looks weird. It looks like White is just giving up another pawn, but in fact, if black takes this pawn, then after knight takes c3, he's got good diagonals and good files to attack for his pieces. So black usually takes here, d takes c3, knight takes c3, and here is the first place where black has to actually be careful about what move he plays. You can see here that the e4 pawn gives White a lot of space. So here, if black plays a normal looking developing move like knight f6, then if he's not careful, then White just plays e5. And after e5, you can see here that the knight has no squares to go to. He has to retreat back to g8. And now you can see White's massive lead in development here, and White is clearly better. So after knight takes c3, almost universally played is knight c6, controlling the e5 square, preventing the e5 push for the time being. White plays knight f3, and here three choices for black. Only about one of them or two of them really make any sense. We're going to be talking about e6 in a later video. E6 is an attempt to shut down the a2 g8 diagonal from the White's bishop. It also makes a few weaknesses on these dark squares though. So one continuation is a trap for black is bishop f4, knight e7. The knight wants to come to g6, and knight b5. And after this, White is in a totally winning position. For example, he's threatening mate in 1. So if queen a5 check, bishop back to d2. Queen back and knight d6 and f7 drops. So that's black has to be very careful from the opening. Another move he can play is a6, although this allows White to just play e5, and this is very good for White. We'll talk about this in a later video as well. So after knight f3, one move for the black can do is pawn to d6. This stops e5 and prepares to develop the light squared bishop. Bishop c4 is White's move. White hits the f7 square, and knight f6. If black is sort of a dragon player, if he wants to get into the dragon and he plays g6 here, then White can play a very surprising move, pawn to e5. Now, in the Smith-Mora Gambit, you always want to look for opportunities to play this move e5. You should be asking yourself, when can't I play e5 instead of when can I play e5? So in this situation, if White plays e5, we'll see what happens when he takes in later variations, but let's just say he plays something like bishop g7, then White can just play e takes, bishop c3, b takes c3, queen takes d6, queen takes, pawn takes, and bishop f4. And you can see here White's massive lead in development, and he's ready to castle in one move his rooks to the center. This d6 pawn is extremely weak, so I'd say White has an edge here. He's also got the bishop pair as well, so White's got an edge here. So after bishop c4, black can also play bishop g4, although this is not recommended because black never wants to develop the light squared bishop very early in the Smith-Mora Gambit because he falls into a few traps. For example, here White can play bishop takes f7, exploiting the undefended g4 bishop. After king takes, knight g5 check, picking up a pawn and exposing black's king. So this is very good for White. After bishop c4, black can also play a6, a6 is an attempt to keep the knight out of b5. We'll come back to this variation and see why black wants to play a6. So after bishop c4, the most commonly seen move is knight to f6. Black thinks everything is safe, but white here has the surprising move. We've seen this before. He's got pawn to e5, and in the previous variation we saw what happens if black declines this pawn. For example, if he declines this pawn by knight g4, then white can push on further with e6. F takes e6, knight g5, and you can see massive weaknesses around the black king. Knight g5, bishop takes e6, bishop takes, knight takes, queen e7, and here a nice move, taking advantage of the position of the queen after he takes the pawn on the knight on e6. Knight d5, threatening knight c7, rook c8, knight takes f8, rook takes f8, castles. And although here white is a pawn down, I'd much rather prefer white in this position. He's got black's king has no prospect of castling. White can generate very quick play by f4 and queen h5, moves like that. Bishop is open, knight is in a powerful position. So it's positions like these that you should be aiming for in the Smith-Mora Gambit. Very dynamic and active positions. Another way that black can decline is knight to d7. Although here white has a nice tactic, bishop takes f7, king takes e6, king g8. If black takes the pawn, then mate comes very soon after. E takes, queen takes. And you can see here, same thing. Although white is a pawn down, he's got black's king is in a terrible position, and his rook on h8, no prospect of getting into the game. And white here, he castles in one move, he plays, his bishop gets developed, his rooks move to the central files. It's a very comfortable play by white, and if you're in this position, you shouldn't be concerned about being a pawn down. So after e5 here, you might ask, why can't black take this pawn? He's got two ways of taking this pawn, d takes e5 or knight takes e5. We'll look at d takes e5 first. This looks perfectly fine, but you see here, after queen takes d8, king takes d8, we'll look at the other capture later. Knight g5, you see here that f7 is under attack, and there's no convenient way for black to defend it. If he plays king c7, tries to run with the king, knight takes f7, rook g8, knight b5 check, king b8, knight e5, knight e5, and bishop f4. You see here that black is close to just getting checkmated, and for example, if attempts to defend the e5 knight, white simply just takes the rook on g8. And let's count the material. 1, 2, 3 pieces. White is an exchange up. Easy exchange up with a blistering attack. So obviously we see here that black cannot do king takes in this position. If he does knight takes d8, then you see here key move by white. White always has to be on the lookout for these weak squares around the black camp. And here he plays knight b5, which is one of the reasons why black in some variations plays a6 before, but we'll look at a6 later. Knight b5, threatening to go on c7. Black plays knight e6. If bishop e6, then just knight c7 anyway. King d7, knight takes a8, pretty straightforward. Bishop takes c4, knight takes e5, with a fork winning the c4 bishop, and white is ahead on material. So here, after knight b5, black can try knight e6, but after bishop takes e6, then c7 just drops as well. So this looks very strong for white after knight b5. So clearly knight d8 is also not a very attractive option. We'll see here also that if king d7, then knight takes e5, and this is just checkmate. If rook b8, then knight takes e5, e6, knight c7, king e7, and you see black is forced to run his king into the center where white can just hunt it down. For example, bishop e3 threatening bishop c5, king d6, bishop f4. If king e7, then rook d1, and white has too many threats here. Black cannot survive. So we'll see many similar positions like this in other variations. For example, we saw after e5 how black cannot take with the pawn, But let's see what happens with it takes if he takes with the knight. If he takes knight takes e5, it's even better for white because he plays knight takes e5, d takes, and surprising move bishop takes f7, winning the queen. So this is very nice for white. So I said before that we would go back to the position where after bishop c4 black does not play knight f6 and he tries to stop all this knight b5 shenanigans with the move a6. And now after a6 black thinks he's neutralized all the threats, and he's also neutralized the e5 move by white because white can't play knight b5. But this is in fact not the case. For example, we see here white plays e5 anyways, and first we'll see a few variations where black declines, which is going to be better than the variations where black accepts. For example, if black just plays e6, then white develops normally with takes, queen e2. Queen e2 is a key move in the Smith-Mora Gambit. Moving the queen to e2 increases the power of this lineup here, allows the rook to slide over to d1 after castling. A rook is much better on d1 than the queen is. So queen e2 is a key move, knight f6, castle, rook d1, queen c7, bishop g5. And this is quite a common position in the Smith-Mora Gambit. We see here that black's c8 bishop is extremely bad, and we also see there's the c file and d file play by white is very strong. We see here that white has good prospects of a kingside attack, and also he controls many central squares. So we'll revisit this position in the second video. But just keep in mind here that if you get this sort of position as white, you should be very happy. So after e5, e6 is a way to decline this pawn offer, but if he accepts with d takes e5, then we'll see how white can take advantage of this. Keep in mind that white cannot play knight b5, so let's see what he does. Queen takes d8, king takes d8. If there's knight takes d8, then we see here that since white can't play knight b5 like he could be able to if the knight was on f6, we see here that the knight is not on f6, so the d5 square is open. So we can play here knight d5, and threatening the c7 and also threatening the weakness b6. So here we see if black tries to defend c7 here, knight e6, then knight b6, rook b8, knight takes e5. You see white's pieces just swarming in after knight f6. White has a very powerful move here. This move takes advantage of the position of the e6 knight. The move is basically just knight takes f7. And after this move, black is lost. So after we see here, if king takes f7, then simply bishop f4. And taking advantage of this pin, and the b8 rook is lost. And we see here after knight takes f7, if knight d4 trying to go for the c2 square, then white can just ignore this. Knight takes h8, knight c2, king e2. And we see here that after white ignores all the threats, he emerges material up, because the a1 knight cannot be saved. So we saw this knight takes f7 idea. What if black takes with the king? If black takes with the king, then white goes in the other way, again with his knight. He plays knight g5, targeting the f7 square. Knight h6, only way to defend the f7 square. Bishop takes f7. Knight d4, going for c2. Bishop a3, not worrying about it because white is just developing his pieces. Material doesn't really count here. After knight c2, king e2, knight takes a1, then white has a very powerful attack. For example, rook d1 check, king c7, knight d5, king b8, knight b6. And you see here that white is virtually winning here. After rook a7, white can play rook takes a1, or he can play rook d8, make things very uncomfortable for black. For example, rook d8, and I don't see a defense that black can realistically do. So this is quite winning for white. So we saw here that a summary of the Smith-Mora Gambit is that white has very powerful and subtle tricks and moves, and a lot of squares that aren't available to him in normal Sicilians become available in the Smith-Mora Gambit. And this is a very powerful opening. And in this video we saw a lot of tricks and traps, so you might think, oh, this Smith-Mora opening is unrivaled, it's really good. But in the later video we'll see what happens if black puts up a more solid defense, a more professional defense, with moves such as e6 and then d6, creating a kind of a wall that white can't break through. And we'll see how to deal with this in a future video. But until then, this is Youngster number 9. Check out my blog, chess9.blogspot.com. Check out my podcast, www.chesscrazytalk.com. It's a podcast about Australian chess, so if you're interested in that, listen to it. We have interviews from grandmasters, international masters. And you can also play me on GameNot.com. My username is Mr. Business, that's with 2 Z's. And until then, signing out, this is Youngster number 9.